Welcome to Click for IB Biology. Our topic is genetics, and in this particular presentation we're looking at the pollination strategies that we find in plants. Plants often feature in genetics questions, particularly the inheritance of alleles, and it's worth knowing a little bit about their reproductive strategies to understand questions better. There's a blank version of this presentation down in the description. You can annotate that with your own notes, and then at the end you might take the 10-question quiz to consolidate and make sure that you have a good understanding of this part of the topic. So plants come up as a common example in genetics questions, and indeed, of course, in the work of Gregor Mendel with pea plants, they feature at the heart of the earliest explanations for genetic inheritance. So let's take a look at some of the fundamental features of plant reproduction. So the male component in a plant flower, so the plant reproductive organ, of course, is called the flower. And flowers contain the male structure, which is called the stamen, and the part which produces the pollen is this structure here on the end, and that's called the anther. In the female section of the flower, we have a structure known as the carpel, and within the carpel there is the famous stigma, which is then joined to the ovary by the style, and then we have the ovary. And the male gamete is released from the anther, and this is transported to the stigma, where a process of pollination followed by fertilization occurs. This can be cross-referenced to the plant reproduction section of the syllabus. Now, the male gamete, which is here, is the pollen grain. And this is a haploid structure and is carried to the female part of the flower. Now, within the ovary, we find structures called ovules, and these are the female gametes in sexual reproduction. So therefore, for a fertilization, we will need a pollen grain plus an ovule. And together they will fertilize and they will produce the embryo. Pollen grain is haploid, ovule is haploid, embryo would be diploid. So the strategies to which I've refer to the way in which the flowers are arranged on the flowering plant. So that's worth remembering, that this discussion relates to flowering plants, the angiosperms only. So we have two groups. We have the dioecious plants. Now, a dioecious plant is where you have male flowers. So it's the flower is only male, and therefore would only have the anther type structure. And then there are female flowers, and they're on separate plants, and that of course would mean the stigma, the style, and the ovary. And so we only find male flowers here, and we only find female flowers here. And so this encourages, in fact it necessitates, what is called cross-pollination, where in the offspring of the cross we will get the greatest variation, that is, differences in the offspring. So this is encouraged. An example of a dioecious plant in which there's separate male and female plants would be the apple tree. So within an apple orchard, ordinarily most of the plants are female, and there has to be a single male tree in order that fertilization can occur, that embryos can be formed, and of course in turn the actual apple fruit itself. The alternative strategy is what we call monoecious plants, and in a monoecious plant we have each flower has both male and female characteristics. It has both the stamen and the carpel within the single flower. So each of these red dots here represents a single flower with anthers and with carpels. Where the pollen grain is transferred from the anther on one plant to the carpel on a separate plant, we call this cross-pollination. And as with the dioecious plants, this encourages genetic variation in the offspring, which is one of the primary benefits of sexual reproduction. And so we need something to take the pollen grain from one flower to another, from one plant to another. Now, this same plant over here, so I'm actually meaning that this particular plant here, as an example of a monoecious plant, it does have a second reproductive strategy, and that is that the anther within a flower could fertilize eggs within a carpel within exactly the same flower structure. Now this is called self-pollination, and self-pollination is will characteristically give less variation and would therefore tend to favor plants which wish to retain the majority of their characteristics, perhaps under stable environmental conditions. Then the self-pollination might be favorable. Overall, cross-pollination is more favored. So these are the ways in which plants reproduce, and it's worth retaining this information and remembering this as you read through the questions that you'll find on the inheritance of alleles and genotypes and phenotypes as we go through genetic crosses. There's a link to the next topic in this genetics course, the chance to subscribe to the channel, that's always greatly appreciated, and the playlist, a list of all the genetics topics that we're covering.